Duncan Miller and the company and their wares and what have you. So I'm going to go ahead and let Kathy go ahead and take over. And like I said, other people may pop on. Wesley, if you have to leave early, I'm sorry, but we'll see you later. Okay?
Okay, so I'm going to share screen here.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Okay, everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Super. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I love to share the story of the Duncan and Miller factories. It's a very lengthy history, which starts well before the Depression era. And for the last 50 years, the National Duncan Glass Society has supported an enlarging and evolving museum, which we're very proud of. Our current museum building is 12,000 square feet in 2 levels, 6,000 of which is devoted to the actual museum display area. And now, how am I going to advance this? My slides are not advancing, so let me see what's going on here. Oh, okay. The history of Duncan and Miller starts way back in 1865, when a gentleman by the name of Daniel Campbell Ripley uh, established a glass factory on the south side of the south bank of the Monongahela River, opposite the point, in an area that at the time was called Birmingham, Pennsylvania, and later became incorporated into the city of Pittsburgh proper. One of his investors was George Duncan, who's a bit of an entrepreneur. He had interests in a previous glass company. He had interests in iron and lumber. And by 1874, after the death of the original Daniel Campbell Ripley, George became the sole owner of the company and renamed it George Duncan and Sons. Now, Daniel Campbell Ripley Sr. had a son also named Daniel Campbell Ripley. And after his family sold their interest in the original factory, the original company, he established a second Ripley and Company in another location on the south side. And because of the similarity in names of both the company and the individuals, father and son, this caused a lot of confusion in the early history of Pittsburgh pattern glass. But having owned the original company, George Duncan and Sons continued to produce and market products that were originally marketed by Ripley and Company. And although we have no catalog information from this company, there are products that are embossed with Ripley and Company and various patent dates that are known patents, and therefore and are present in the earliest known George Duncan and Sons catalogs. The most famous of these are the Roman double candlestick, where you see that circular well and that lovely glass top, topped by a cross, which is called the baptismal font candlestick, and also the double lamps that are dubbed the marriage lamps. And that central area, which should have a lid, which is almost always absent when you have the opportunity to buy one, held the matches. So it was a match holder. George Duncan and Sons, while on the south side of Pittsburgh, produced both blown but primarily pressed ware, and existed from 1874 to 1892. In 1891, they became incorporated into United States Glass Combine and became Factory D of U.S. Glass. One of the most famous of the early Duncan patterns is three-face, and three-face was designed and patented by John Ernest Miller, who was recruited by George Duncan in 1874 as the superintendent of their mold shop and principal designer. So he is responsible for many of the earliest Duncan patterns from this era. Most of this time period, glass was colorless, although it could have been enhanced with frosting or colored stains. There's a fairly brief interval in the mid-1880s when color became popular, and many of the companies that were producing what we now collectors call early American patterned glass from this period produced glass in a similar color palette. Collectors call it the ABC colors: amber, blue, and canary, which is produced with uranium dioxide as a colorizing agent. And this color is now referred by collectors as Vaseline glass, and it does glow under backlight. In 1892, only a year after joining U.S. Glass, the factory, the Tremont Glass Works on the south side of Pittsburgh, was destroyed in a fire. There were some residual warehouse type buildings, but definitely the hot glass furnace room was completely destroyed. By that time, like several of the families that had owned and operated glass factories that joined the Combine, the Duncans had become rather disillusioned by their association with U.S. Glass, and they decided to build a new factory after U.S. Glass decided not to rebuild their factory in Pittsburgh. And indeed, they built the factory in 1893 in Washington, Pennsylvania. And Washington is about 25 to 30 miles southwest of Pittsburgh. And unlike Pittsburgh, it is not on the rivers. But by this period, there was a very rich railroad system which replaced the rivers for the transportation of bulk commodities. And Washington was serviced both by the B&O Railroad and connectors to the Pennsylvania Railroad. So there was no difficulties with transportation. What Washington County had was a very rich, newly discovered oil and gas strike, which tapered out for most commercial purposes by the 1920s, only to enjoy a resurgence with the development of fracking technology. So our region is actually once again enjoying a rich oil and gas production. Initially, the company was called George Duncan Sons and Company, very subtle difference from the original Pittsburgh company, but capitalizing on the name recognition that had been established in Pittsburgh. But they incorporated the partnership in 1900, and the name changed to Duncan Miller Glass Company, as by this time, John Ernest Miller and his family had an equity position in the company. They did not own the intellectual property of the original company, so they could not continue to produce their original patterns, either with original molds or newly built molds. And therefore, all of the production of the company in Washington are new and unique patterns. But they followed a similar course originally with these sort of reproduction cut glass looking patterns produced in press glass, which made them much more affordable than the cut glass that was being produced and marketed at the time. But throughout the 19 teens and into the 20s, there was an evolution in the style of glass. From the busy patterns of the Victorian era, we're now seeing a sort of simplification, which was originally called by all the companies in the industry colonial designs. They were inspired by very early colonial glass, which would have been freehand blown, and if paneled, it would have been cut to produce the panels. This is all pressed, but because it was very simple, it really required a minimum of the kinds of disfigured things like stone inclusions, bubbles, straw marks that one can find in pressed glass if it's not done well. This was a period where some of the factories, which originally were all hand, were evolving into machine-made glassware. However, Duncan Miller Glass Company continued to use handmade techniques and pot glass throughout its subsequent history. As you can see, these very simple designs were also a wonderful template for decoration. And Duncan and Miller did a lot of decoration, primarily amber stain rather than ruby, and a lot of application of gold. Although the decoration you see in this compote, which also has some wonderful colored fruit decoration, was probably done by a decorating company and not in-house. By the 1920s, you're seeing once again an evolution in design with a sort of simpler, lighter, less thick, heavy, and clunky aesthetic, but still incorporating often rather traditional designs with a modern twist. The company in Washington, up until the mid-20s, had not made any colored glass except for a brief interval where they did some milk glass that they called Nubelux. But in the mid-20s, they began incorporating the colors that we often associate with the Depression era, the amber, pink, and green. In addition, they developed a concept of setting the whole table in glass. And many of the companies were doing this at the time. So while earlier glass was more accessories to your china or stoneware, tableware, now for the first time we're seeing the incorporation of things like cups and saucers and full-size dinner plates so that you could serve your entire meal on glass. And we're seeing some of these dinnerware sets, including sandwich and spiral flutes and Georgian. And by the 1930s, the very early 30s, we're seeing another expansion of the color palette, now incorporating the jewel tones of ruby and cobalt blue, and also black, which Duncan called theirs ebony. And Duncan's ebony is a true opaque black. It is not that black that when you hold it up against a strong light, you can see purple tones that are often called black amethyst, which some people inappropriately use to refer to all black glass from the 1930s, and that is not truly the case. They're also starting to incorporate Art Deco type shapes, and of course, with the 1933 repeal of prohibition, you are seeing a proliferation of barware, as well as the associated smoking accessories. More of the famous open stock dinnerware patterns are being introduced, like teardrop, as well as some wonderful patterns designed by Robert May, Terrace, and Caribbean. So you see some of the Art Deco shapes from this period. Some of these don't actually have names. They were only really associated with pattern numbers, like 16 and 12, which we fondly call the rocket vase. And many of these patterns were tableware accessories, including bowls, vases, and candlesticks, rather than full patterns. Robert May was Duncan's first professional industrial designer, trained at Carnegie Technical Institute, which is now known as Carnegie Mellon University, which had one of the first academic industrial design programs. And he designed Terrace as one of it's his first full dinnerware pattern. And it was produced both in round and square shapes. So you can find round dinner plates, round saucers, and also square shapes, as well as accessory pieces that sort of go with either. This was done in ruby red, cobalt blue, amber, and of course, crystal. The colors that were introduced in the 1940s, including Duncan's opalescent colors called cranberry, Cape Cod, and jasmine, as well as a brief introduction of milk glass, and a color chartreuse, which was introduced after uranium became unavailable to commercial use during World War II, and thereafter as a result of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War. We also find the introduction of what Duncan called sculptured glass, which was a high relief, very similar to the things that were designed by René Lalique, as well as a number of solid animals and swans, made famous by the glass menagerie with the animals produced by Heisey, A.H. Heisey and Company, that were actually used in the stage play. And this pattern Canterbury, which you can find in crystal, and also the pale blue that Duncan called sapphire, with and without a number of Duncan's plate etchings, the most famous of which is First Love, that was designed to complement the Rogers Brothers silver plate pattern of the same name. Duncan's opalescent colors of Cape Cod blue, jasmine yellow, and cranberry pink can be found in a number of patterns from the early and mid 40s. Interestingly, sadly, these were introduced in 1941, heavily advertised throughout 1942, only to be withdrawn from production later in the war due to not only the unavailability of uranium for the yellow color, but also the types of chemicals used to produce the opalescence. So all three were not produced in the later period, like 44 and 45. At the end of World War II, Duncan was able to reintroduce the colors of Cape Cod and cranberry. But uranium was not available to be used in the glass industry as a colorant until after Duncan and Miller had closed. And uranium that was used later by many companies such as Fenton. After 1959 is depleted uranium. It is not naturally mined uranium as was used earlier. These are some of the examples of what I mean by sculptured glass and the solid glass animals. Duncan primarily was into birds, so they had the heron. They did a ruffled grouse, which is the Pennsylvania state bird. They did a goose. They did a bird of paradise. They did a dove. And of course, they did a solid swan in 3 sizes. The sailfish has several versions with different treatments of the fin in both shape and with and without the ridges that you see in the fin. And then there is a donkey, cart, and peon. All of these were designed by Robert May. Generally, they're found in clear glass, but you can see them frosted, occasionally in the sapphire blue with or without frosting, and very rarely in the opalescent blue. By the mid-50s, Duncan and Miller was introducing mid-century modern designs that were designed by industrial designers with studios in New York City. They also introduced the early 50s color palette of smoky avocado, which you see here, a brown they called teakwood, a Biscayne green, which is a darker green with some bluish tinges, and they called their crystal at this point contemporary crystal. These are not dinnerware sets. They are accessory pieces that are designed to be both barware and to accessorize a more casual buffet type service that is being popularized by the 1950s. So you see designs here, festive from your left to right, festive designed by Michael Lax, which, as you can see, incorporates these wonderful mahogany wood pieces to the glass. And lest you worry about the effect of water on the wood pieces, these all come apart. They're held together with a wooden with a metal connector, which Duncan also used in their candelabras. And so you can unscrew it and just wash the glass. Laguna, the center picture, was designed by James Rosati. He actually was born and raised in Washington, Pennsylvania, but became a sculptor and is best known not for any kind of design work for industry, but his fine art, including monumental sculptures, one of which was in the plaza of the World Trade Center. And sadly, because it was a very cubist aluminum sculpture, it could not be identified in the amidst the beams and materials of the World Trade Center buildings. So it is lost to the art world. Raymore Connoisseur was designed by Ben Seibel, who also designed quite a lot for Fostoria, as well as an enormous amount of work in the ceramics industry for a variety of companies, including Steubenville Pottery, Oneida, even Mikasa. And his designs for Duncan are very interesting because they reconfigured this crackle technique, but it's done in pressed glass. Crackle is almost invariably done with a blown technique. And I know of no other company that did a pressed crackle. The company in Washington, Pennsylvania closed its stores in 1955. But that's not really the end of the products that were designed and produced by Duncan and Miller. Because James Duncan III, the then fourth generation Duncan, who was president of the company at that time, negotiated a sale of the equipment, molds, and intellectual property back to, believe it or not, the United States Glass Company, which was then headquartered in Tiffin, Ohio, and had production factories in Tiffin and Glassport, Pennsylvania. And Duncan himself and many of the Duncan workers went to Tiffin, Ohio, and started the Duncan division of U.S. Glass. And they had their own independent marketing section, their own catalogs, and they produced many of the more contemporary Duncan patterns and a handful of reissues of some of their older pattern glass patterns, most notably Homestead, produced both in crystal and in the lovely colors more associated with Tiffin. And this is why you can see Duncan patterns in purple, which Duncan and Miller themselves did not produce. And yet Tiffin produced that deep rosy purple they called plum, as well as a dichroic glass, which other companies called alexandrite, which uses the chemical neodymium, and which, when the Duncan division marketed the color, it was called Dawn. And when Tiffin marketed the color from U.S. Glass molds, it was called Wisteria. Same color, same glass, two different names. Even though United States Glass Corporation went bankrupt in 1963, the factory at Tiffin continued with various ownerships until 1980. And a good deal of their production, their later production, were Duncan shapes. A great deal of their, for instance, ashtrays and things were Duncan Pall Mall designs. So in total, we trace at the museum the history of the various Duncan products from 1865 to 1980 in 3 locations: Pittsburgh, Washington, Pennsylvania, and Tiffin, Ohio. Although a good deal of the crystal glassware in Sandwich and Canterbury and Teardrop was also produced at the Glassport factory of U.S. Glass in Glassport, Pennsylvania, which is a sort of an exurb of Pittsburgh itself. So that's the end of my PowerPoint. I'll just say that our society, the National Duncan Glass Society, was established in 1975, 20 years after the factory closed here in Washington. Sadly, shortly after the factory closed, about 2 years later, the real estate and buildings had been sold, but before anything could be established, that factory burned down, completely burned down. So we have none of the original factory buildings. Important founding mission of the society was the establishment of a permanent collection open to display. It has been displayed first in a section of a house museum owned by the Washington County Historical Society. And then ultimately, our society was able to purchase a freestanding museum. And we are now in our second museum location in a much enlarged facility, which was actually opened in 2018 for the public. And we're very proud of it. Our blue sky plans for the future are a significant addition to our current building, which is a rather boring, what looks like one story from the front, but is actually 2 stories, with a walkout basement that you can access from the rear of the building. We would like to make an addition which has the physical appearance from the outside of a furnace house, of a glass factory, which has a very characteristic shape, and incorporate not only expanded displays and the ability to do special events, but a hot shop. So we're committed to bringing the production of glass back to Washington, Pennsylvania. I should also note that our museum also celebrates the other companies that produce glass in Washington, Pennsylvania, including no less than 3 factories operated by the Hazel Atlas Corporation and many other factories that produced a whole variety of glass products in addition to glass tableware, including bottles and jars, glass lamps, electric lamps, rolled glass, what was called cathedral glass, both colored and textured, used in all sorts of architectural applications. And we would like to have the space to dramatically expand those elements of the displays. And we will in the future when we build our addition. Are there any questions?
I'm trying to think how to phrase this. I mean, with some companies, when they were absorbed into this conglomerate like National or US Glass or anything, people try to be very definitive about this was a US Glass pattern and not a Duncan pattern and things like that. But it doesn't seem like you all do that, which I like, because typically, I don't typically associate what was it, Three Faces as a US Glass pattern. I always think of that as a Duncan pattern.
Right. Well, I like to say that our strategy now is to be lumpers rather than splitters. There was a time when some members of the society didn't even want to embrace what was produced in Pittsburgh. And they thought that Duncan and Miller should only incorporate the products done here in Washington. But one of the reasons that it's a little bit simpler than a lot of other companies is that the factory burned down in Pittsburgh in 1892. So there's really only a couple of patterns that are associated as far as glass with Factory D of US Glass, and most notably barred oval. They did do some snail pattern later on. That's why you see, or beaded, not, yeah, they did some snail. And they also brought back that beaded swirl pattern that you sometimes see in that green, which actually US Glass didn't produce until 1898. So that was well after the Duncans were out of the picture. What's even more confusing is that it seems in part of the property in Pittsburgh that US Glass owned, they built another factory, which was a decorating factory. So they called that Factory D. And so they didn't make the glass, but they did a lot of decorations, which a lot of the hand painted decorations that have been erroneously attributed to Factory R. Tiffin, Ohio, because of the US Glass Association, were actually decorated at Factory D, which persisted along with 5 glass producing factories on the south side of Pittsburgh until 1938. And that issue of who produced what was seriously muddled by a few authors. And sadly, when mistakes are made and they're enshrined in the literature, it can be extremely difficult to correct the story. But because they didn't produce a lot of glass under the guise of Factory D early on, there is not as much of a confusion about the pattern glass issue. Now, in terms of the Tiffin issue, once again, there is a prejudice to those products for Duncan collectors. However, Tiffin collectors like them a lot. So if you want to sell something made from a Duncan mold in a Tiffin color like plum, you'll get a much better price from a Tiffin collector than a Duncan collector. Irregardless, I consider it a part of the history of the company and its products and its designs, and therefore the museum does not share the prejudice of many Duncan collectors. As a matter of fact, we're the beneficiary because we can get it cheaper. I must say, though, that most, I would say probably 95 plus of everything in our collection is donated. We have only on very rare occasions discovered something offered for sale that is purchased by the museum itself. Oftentimes the museum will find something and then find a donor that will buy it for us.
So I have to say,
surprisingly, things show up that no one has ever seen before. Not every day, but every year there's something that shows up that has not previously been seen or photographed or documented in some way.
I found it interesting when you talked about, I had heard that all I've ever really heard was that some Tiffin workers or some Duncan workers went to Tiffin
Yeah.
but I didn't, to hear that they had separate facilities and separate, that's kind of interesting. I didn't realize they had done that.
Yes, we have a catalog, which there are still, I mean, we've reproduced a lot of our catalogs, but we can still get originals uh, that show up. People in Tiffin, Ohio have boxes and boxes of original catalogs of the, let me see if I have it here. Yes, I do. This catalog is Handmade Duncan, the loveliest glassware in America, which was Duncan's tagline. Catalog number 93, Duncan and Miller Division, United States Glass Company, Tiffin, Ohio. And it's all Duncan patterns, with the exception of a handful of things in milk glass that were produced in Glassport that that are done from non-Duncan molds. And I think they just decided that it was easier to just market the milk glass in the Duncan catalog. So some of the milk glass is Duncan patterns, and some of it are some other US glass patterns. But aside from that, the entire catalog is all, Canterbury and Pall Mall and Murano and all Duncan patterns. So they really did have a formal division and their own marketing
Hmm.
people.
That's
And there's lots of interesting history about US glass that for the size of the company, it's kind of hard to understand why so little has been written over the years, and therefore there's so little generally known about this enormous combine. Its early history is being published in a whole series of books by the Glass Flakes Press at the Museum of American Glass in West Virginia, written by Sid Lethbridge, based upon copious amounts of material that the Bredehoffs, Neela and Tom Bredehoff, collected over many, many years and never got around to organizing and publishing. But he's still, I mean, I think they're on their fifth book, and they're still in the 19 teens. So I'm hoping they continue that work up into the 20s. I think that would be very revealing to a lot of collectors that thought that a lot of these lovely, more contemporary shapes and colors and frosted items that have always been attributed to Factory R in Tiffin, Ohio, were actually being produced by the residual factories in Pittsburgh.
So are there any other questions for Kathy?
No question, but a very, very, very high recommendation. It's been an excellent program.
Well, thank you. This is obviously an overview of a company from 1,000 feet above, just focusing on the colors and the style, some of the designs, and the change in design and popularity of colors throughout the many decades that the company produced glass. Just enormous amount of beautiful patterns and things that are not included in this talk, obviously. So you're just going to have to drop by the museum someday.
Well, we did drop by the old museum in the old house, And so we thoroughly enjoyed that. And so now we look forward to making another trip up that direction and seeing the new museum.
Well, I have to say, I was at the museum in October, and Kathy did a wonderful presentation for those of us who were there. And it is a fantastic building, and you are utilizing the space very well. And as somebody who's dealing with an organization who has its own museum, I'm very jealous of what you have.
Well, I'll tell you, I tell people all the time, when do a bunch of amateurs get to design their own museum? I mean, really, it's a challenge. Our society is almost entirely volunteer run, um, and supported by philanthropy. We do apply for some local grants for some of the things that we do, but the vast majority of our support is from our members, and it's it's a challenge, but it also gives you complete independence of control over your displays and how you want to display your glass. And I think you'd enjoy visiting the new museum, especially if you're remembering fondly the little house we owned on Jefferson Avenue. It did have uh, some sentimental value because it had originally been a glassworker's house, and it was very close to the physical location of the factory. But we've been able to do a lot more with the facility that we have now. But incredibly, having enlarged our footprint by 10 times, give or take, we now are completely out of space. So no matter how much space you build, you fill it.
So,
It's just like being in a house. How many closets can you have? And you fill them all,
Can't have too many.
right?
Can't have too many.
Yeah. So,
right. So, any more questions for Kathy? I want to say, first of all, thank you for doing this.
yes.
This is wonderful. I mean, I knew about Duncan and Miller. I didn't know it in depth like that, and it's fascinating. I like the history behind a lot of these companies. I mean, that's part of what the intrigue is for me. So, thank you for doing this.
Well, I like to feel that although we are sort of focused on a particular area of the country and a particular family, it is illustrative of so many of the similar glass companies. You can talk about McKee, you can talk about Heisey itself. A.H. Heisey started at Ripley and Company and George Duncan and Sons. And indeed, he married George's eldest daughter, Susan. So the Heiseys and the Duncans worked in parallel until they joined U.S. Glass. And then ultimately, when they left, they went in different directions, but for similar motivation. So many of these, it's kind of interesting when you think about it, but the advantages of producing of a combine in terms of reducing cost, administrative costs, economics of scale, was also the disadvantage in terms of these many largely family-owned companies or partnerships where the partners or the family members were the executives of these companies. Now you take 13 or 15 odd companies and you make them into one company, and you only need one president, one vice president, one treasurer, and all of these family members are getting their pink slips. So it's quite understandable that that some of these families came to regret their association and ultimately invested in new and independent companies. And because the south side of Pittsburgh was getting very built up and congested, they sort of moved to the region, but outside of the city itself. And so, for instance, Duncan went to Washington and McKee went to Jeanette, and but a very, very similar story in many ways. So if you know one intensely, you sort of understand them all. And everybody was competing for the same market. And so they tended to do the same colors and the same designs because that's what was selling. And they weren't making art glass. They were making glass to be sold and used. And that was the motivation for the design.
So, all right. If there are no more questions for Kathy, I'm going to open it up. We always close with a little show and tell from things that people have. So, Phyllis, I'm going to ask you first. You always seem to have something, but you haven't been out shopping, I guess.
No, I haven't been out, so nothing for me today.
All right, Gwinnell.
Of course I have something.
Good.
And yeah, shopping back in November. It just, but the Duncan with sticker in the blue opalescent, which I guess is now, what is that? Cape Cod blue is what they called it.
Yes.
And I've got the cream and sugar to go with it. And they also have the stickers.
Oh, very cool.
And then there's another, got the terrace with the gold trim on it, which I think is a lotus trim.
Mhm.
And so it's just in really, really, really good shape. So, but those are my Duncan ones that I pulled out. I've got others, but those are the neat ones. They were easy to get to.
So, Kathleen.
I do. I have two. So I think they're both Duncan and Miller Canterbury. So there's this. This has a Rockwell all
Okay.
over
Yeah.
pattern with a it's a rose.
Mm-hmm.
The mark on the bottom in the pattern. And the other one is actually one of my absolute favorite pieces in my silver deposit collection because it is a piece of Duncan Miller Canterbury with Rockwell's Canterbury on it. I'll put it right side up with a label that says Canterbury.
Cool.
Oh my gosh, we have a number of those pieces. I never knew what the decoration was called.
Yeah, it's
Canterbury.
Rockwell's and it's called Canterbury. So I was really excited when I finally got a piece of Canterbury with Canterbury and it's one of the very few labels that Rockwell did that had the pattern name on it.
Wow,
so that's the perfect one.
Super.
So yeah, this is one of my favorite pieces. I don't have the cup for it, but this is easier to photograph and store.
Hold that up again.
I'll hold it up and try to hold it still.
Oh yes, very nice.
Yeah. Very cool.
So, Mary and Jeff, do you have anything for show and tell?
No, I just remembered I had a Canterbury. We picked up a Canterbury compote with an underplate that had a decoration on it, and I forgot to pull it out, and I'm not sure where it is right now. So,
Doug, what about you?
No, I don't have any Duncan and Miller, although this presentation now I definitely want to buy some. What was the pattern? I was too busy looking at the shape of it. The red one that you showed, Kathy, that was square, but you said it also came in
Terrace.
Ferris?
Terrace.
Terrace. Oh, that would be beautiful
And
to
we
put out.
saw a terrace cream and sugar with the lotus decoration.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hold that up again,
And you
Yeah,
see
Quennell.
let's do that
those
again.
the
There it is.
handles. It was designed to be very Art Deco looking.
Oh,
So
that's my
the
favorite.
terrace is kind of, I think they're talking pretty much about the base. You see how the base is kind of stepped and has that,
Very
yeah,
rigid.
those ridges.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then the handles are that kind of really cool deco shape too.
Those are
So
neat. Yeah. I'm looking for a set of ruby glassware, so I think that would be the next one I'm gonna look for. Are they pretty difficult to find?
yeah, especially the goblets
The goblets.
are challenged. You see, you find the tumblers sometimes, which they made in several sizes.
Thank you.
Well, as most anybody who's been here, I I go out more than I probably should.
Caribbean.
And I found the punch bowl in
Wow.
Caribbean, and I found 9 cups to go with it. Back in Brown County, Indiana, I was back visiting, going up to see my mom, and stopped, and there it was in the little town of Gnawbone. And then I have this piece.
Mhm.
So would this have been considered a covered candy?
Yes.
Okay, so it's in this Sylvan pattern. So those are the 2 pieces of Duncan that I have here. I did the last time I actually spoke to Kathy in person was we were on a Zoom meeting about a month ago, and I was at a glass show, and I was the one who spoke up after about an hour and said, "Well, if there's nothing else, I'd like to go shop the show." This is the only piece that came home with me. It's a batter jug made by the DC Jenkins Glass Company out of Kokomo. I've got one in green, and interestingly, it has a similar cutting on it. But what's different is there's also a cutting on the lid, which if you look at the handle, there's just not much to it. So I don't expect that these survived very well. So I'm very happy to make this. You typically find it you see it more often in the green color, which Jenkins had a very unique, odd green color compared to what most companies were doing. So um, that's what I got at the show. I was very happy to find it. But so that's what I have today. So I wanted to let everybody know I've got something scheduled for March 7th. Um, and I'm sorry, but I'm probably gonna not pronounce his name correctly, which drives me crazy. But Brad Gogan from the EAPG Society is going to talk about the Canton Glass Company. Um, so he really, and that was another company that was in business for quite a few years in different places and things like that. So he's going to talk about the Canton Glass Company and some of the wares that they made. So that's what we'll be showing in March. So, and I'll let everybody know if you'd like to join, that's fine. So, I don't know. Anybody have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I have a show and tell.
Okay.
Okay. This is just a nice story. Our last journal just came out and was mailed early January. And in it, I had a short article about a pattern that was produced in the early 1930s at a time where we don't have a lot of catalog material. I think because of the Depression, they just weren't producing something expensive like a catalog for marketing purposes. So we have a few examples of this pattern. which was done primarily just in clear glass. It's called Whitney, and it's got some rather striking architectural elements, but didn't seem to be a very extensive pattern. However, in going back over our trade journals to find references to Whitney, we have like 2 advertisements and a comment, a sort of editorial comment in a trade journal. You know, one of the things where their editors would write about the new products that were being brought out by a certain company. And in it, they describe all these forms that nobody's ever seen, like an oval cream and sugar. And one of the things was a cocktail shake. And like I called around to all of our members, including someone who is a long-standing collector of barware and whose extensive collection was photographed for the barware book, you know, the blue one. And he'd never seen or heard of it. And so I was just throwing it out there in the article. Here are these items we've never seen. And we don't know whether they were produced or whether they were just, they thought they were going to produce them and never got around to making the molds or whatever. And one day we got an email from a member who lives in California. And he says, I was just perusing this internet barware sales site, and I think they have a Whitney cocktail shake. And I think it was made from the mold that they used to make the vase. And so check it out.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
this is our Whitney cocktail shaker.
Oh.
We have a couple of vases in the collection which have the identical shape up until here. And then they sort of do a little sort of flare. And this, of course, gets cupped in. And it's got this very interesting strainer lid,
Yep.
with a little cap that comes off to pour after you shake it. And yet it sort of has this cork gasket that fits into the top of the shaker. So we had the opportunity to buy this thanks to Michael Crummy from California, who found it for us.
Cool.
That is a really, really handsome Duncan Miller cocktail shaker. That is phenomenal.
Well, I emailed Mike after it came and I said, you know, I can't say for certain that even if I were perusing that site, I would have recognized.
Yeah.
Because every one of our other shakers in Caribbean and 502 and Terrace, and they're all basically cylindrical shakers with a flat bottom.
Right.
We have no other shaker that looks like this. It has a foot and it has a shape like this.
Yeah.
And he really had a good eye in recognizing what it
I've
was.
always been a big fan of Duncan Miller. And my wife Mary and I have a good friend, Dave Cooper.
That's the person she was talking about. They had the.
That's who I was talking about.
Yeah.
We had glass photographed in the barware book too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff in there. But it was a competition. Who could outdo each other?
So I pulled our vase out of the case and took a photograph side by side that we sent to David. And, you know, and he was like, oh my God, is that available for sale? No, we just bought it for the museum. So he has some little stemmed cocktails that he's going to donate. So we'll have a nice set.
Nice.
With a shaker and like 6 of the little cocktails.
Good.
Nice.
That's very fascinating. I mean, that's not a pattern I'd heard of. I mean, I know most of Duncan and Miller's well-known patterns, Canterbury, Terrace, those kinds of things. But so was that pattern only made for a year or two?
It was probably made rather briefly. The advertisement says it was only made in crystal, but we have a ebony vase. You see a number of they did these beer mugs that have like colored stuck handles, applied handles in various colors, and we have some of those. But it was not a very broad pattern. Like there's no dinnerware. There is apparently some plates. They're probably just like dessert plates and small bowls. But mostly you see some stems and tumblers, and the mugs show up every once in a while. And we have a couple of vases. But you just don't, it's not a very broad or deep pattern. And I've said many, many times in many articles over the years, because I've been writing the journal for like 12 years now. Boy, I wish we could find one of these. If anybody's ever seen one of these, have you ever heard of one of these? Every once in a while, somebody will find one. And that's the beauty of having a nationwide reach, is there's people all over the country looking for these things. And ironically, sometimes a company would produce something either to be marketed by a different company, or just for some reason, the vast majority of the stock got shipped rather than sold locally. So things that you can't find locally will show up in the oddest places.
Yep.
But they did market nationally and internationally. And so, back in the day, this stuff was shipped all over the place.
All right. Well, again, Kathy, thank you very much for taking the time to share with us. I mean, I certainly have learned more than uh, I knew about Duncan and Miller to begin with. So I've always been fascinated with their designs, and thankfully, my husband is probably thinking, "Oh, please don't collect anything else." So I won't start it.
I know the feeling.
But do we believe you? Do
Yeah.
we believe you?
I don't know. He just walked into the room. I don't know.
No, I saw him.
He's looking at that punch bowl. Oh my God.
Okay, so while everybody's here, let's get a show of hands. If you believe him, hold your hand up. Uh-huh. See this?
Nobody.
So, all right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming in. It's always nice to see everybody, people that I've known for years in person, and Mary and Jeff, who I've known for years in online, but we've never actually seen each other face to face before. So it's nice to see that. So, thank you. I want to thank everybody, and like I said, hopefully we'll see you in March. Okay. All right.
Great program.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well done. Well done.